All good?
All good.
Okay, cool. All right, everybody. This would be episode 11, where we're kind of just working through the rules. Obviously, originally we intended to do it kind of chapter by chapter, but sometimes life just gets in the way, and we're just kind of do it as we can. And sometimes it'll be in the mid chapter where we have to stop. Sometimes it'll be, then we'll pick up a couple weeks later, whatever. We'll just kind of push through at this point. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
So we picked up with we had just talked about naval. Oh no, we had just talked about air transport cargo,
Mm-hmm.
and we were just about to start naval non-combat movement.
Right. Yeah.
So ships may freely ignore a submerged enemy submarine when moving into a sea zone. Surface ships may not move into a sea zone containing enemy surface warships or
Mm-hmm.
enemy aircraft on map. Just doesn't happen. If moving
Yep.
surface ships into a sea zone containing non-submerged enemy submarines, the defending submarines may elect to engage the ships. One round of combat occurs immediately. The attacking player's units get to use their attack values, and the defending player's submarines get to use their defense values. After the single round of combat, surviving ships may continue their movement. Their movement range and abilities are not affected. If moving one or more submarines without accompanying surface warships into a sea zone containing enemy ships without an aircraft on map, the submarines may ignore the ships and continue moving. Moving one or more submarines into a sea zone containing enemy aircraft on map, the aircraft may elect to attack the submarines for one round of combat. Enemy destroyers may also be paired during this attack on the submarines. Exception are advanced submarines. Surviving submarines may continue moving. Their movement range and abilities are not affected. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a little cleaner than it was in version 3.
Yep.
A
I'd
little more
say. Yeah.
straightforward. So yeah, I don't see any, I don't have any major questions with this as of right now, how it would work. I think it makes pretty good sense.
I think so. Yeah.
Naval transporting cargo. Naval transports may transport land units and strategic rockets. Naval transports may pick up before or during their non-combat movement. This also includes while in port, refer to 11.5. The units must not have moved before being picked up. A naval transport may unload its units in one or more adjacent land zones, but may not continue moving after unloading. Transported units may move no further after debarking. If a naval transport is destroyed, the units it carries are also destroyed. You can transport aligned members of your alliance forces on your naval transports. Such units would load on their player turn, move on your player turn, and unload on the next player turn.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, and this was just clarified like about 10 minutes ago, airplanes can no longer be transported on transports.
Okay.
So it's just not a thing anymore.
Right. Right.
Sometimes it'd be worth it to use strategic, you load up a fighter, move it onto a naval transport, strategically move it 5
Yeah.
spaces where it would only otherwise be able to move 4, and you can get that extra
Mm-hmm.
space and get it unloaded where it needs to go, but just not a thing
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good to know. Yeah.
All right. Strategic naval movement. You want to take this one?
Sure. So each nation can move a number of units using strategic naval movement. The units that can be moved with strategic naval movement are naval transports, optionally loaded with land units and strategic rockets. A naval strategic naval movement capacity is the total number of units that can be moved. Each land or naval unit counts as one, so a naval transport carrying 2 units is 3 strategic naval moves. So it works against that capacity. I would probably write that a little bit different because strategic naval moves is like, okay, so does that mean it could almost imply that it's the movement itself that's being reduced, not so much the spaces.
Yeah, it's but it kind of works just like rail capacity.
Right,
If
yeah.
you think
I,
about it,
I,
yeah.
I think they show the strategic naval move capacity is reduced by 3 or something like that. Make it a
Yeah, I
little
get
bit
what you're
clearer.
saying.
Maybe. The range of strategic naval movement is up to 5 sea zones. It may not go through closed canals, closed straits, or through a zone that has enemy surface warships, non-submerged submarines, or aircraft on maritime air patrol. Strategic naval movement cannot depart from an enemy-occupied sea zone. So that means if you start your turn off and there's enemy ships in that sea zone for whatever reason. Not sure exactly. Well, yeah.
That can happen quite often.
It could happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could happen.
Especially now with import.
Yeah. Interesting. The unit must start and end their movement at a minor or major friendly port, shipyard, or dockyard. Units can be loaded up along the way so long as they're also at a friendly port, shipyard, or dockyard. So of any kind. Minor ports, minor shipyards, and minor dockyards can only unload units with each worth up to 5 IPP. That's kind of their capacity. Note that strategic naval movement has many exceptions to the standard rules for other movement. Units moving via strategic naval movement cannot move freely out of a sea zone containing enemy units. Units moving via strategic naval movement can move into a sea zone containing units from other alliances whom they are at peace during non-combat movement. Nations at peace may not declare war on another major power to interdict strategic naval movement. Units carrying cargo from the allied nations cannot be strategically naval moved. Okay, all right. I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't really have anything to comment on.
You know how I feel about strategic naval movement.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm gonna go off on a little bit of a tangent. It's a hot take, but it's more about something I would like to see in the design future of the game, and any that I would consider a problem with the game. It's something I would like to see. We have battleships that take 2.5 years to get from London down to Egypt.
Sure. Yeah.
We have naval transports that can take even longer. I mean, it's just, here's the thing. Historically, it took so much quicker over 6 months, and that's what they've defined the turn as. They've defined the turn as 6 months, and it doesn't make any sense to me why it takes 2.5 years, roughly, for a battleship to get from London to Egypt. Now, I'm not saying that this is a problem with the game as it currently stands. This is a desire to see that aspect of history be better represented in future editions. That's all I'm saying, because it really is difficult for me to suspend my disbelief with how slow moving those ships are.
Yeah. Like, I know this is a bit of a tangent from going over the rules, but I'm going to play the devil's advocate in this one to some extent, because though I agree with you in concept, it'd be nice for fleets to move quicker because it makes sense. But then where do you stop? Because you have the same argument saying infantry also will take 2.5 years, unless they're railing, to get from France to Poland, right? You have that suspension of disbelief there, and then there's aircraft as well too. So you get into this massive problem when it comes to aligning timeframes to game. So I guess I said I was supposed to be devil's advocate in this one. So I would say something like... You're not
doing a very good job.
Yeah, I know, right?
You're almost making my point for me without unintentionally.
Yeah, that's right.
But
so
no, I will add real quick that the ground units move way too slow as well.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So now, I guess my devil's advocate position would be well, you don't know what else you would mess up if you change one feature. If you say, no, okay, ships can move double their movement, you don't know what a second and third tier consequences there would be. It'd be an entirely different game. Another point I could say is well, it's not so much that the ships themselves are moving, it's the onshore facilities and such. And you could even extend that further and say, no, it's also the political climate, or whatever you want to call it. Say look, the British people won't stand for moving a portion of the British Navy into the Indian Ocean. They just don't want it. Doesn't matter what you, the authoritarian dictator, want to do. There's limits to what the people will allow. So you can make
the people are revolting against the great hand from the sky coming down.
That's right. But you could build a narrative of a story as to why it's that way. And I think it all stems basically to this concept of perhaps they shouldn't have put a time frame and saying, it's 6 months. They should have left that kind of off books without trying to refer to it specifically, and let the player themselves imagine whatever time seems appropriate. Right?
Well, some level of suspension of disbelief is always going to have to take place in any sort of, really any sort of board game, especially a war game.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm asked to stretch my disbelief so far that it snaps.
Yeah.
And the restriction on the naval movements, for starters, is one that really, really just bugs me. Now, I'm somebody who says, yes, go back to the drawing board
Hmm.
and design it from a much more historical perspective. And will that be a different game? Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a
Hmm.
problem with that. But then again, I'm not the one actually doing the work. Although
Hmm.
you and I have talked, and me and some of my other friends have talked extensively about ways that this might be addressable within the current framework of the game,
Yeah.
that might make a little more sense without necessarily giving the allies this huge uber advantage all of a sudden. I
Hmm.
think there are ways to do it. Now, that's a whole different discussion for a whole different video about house ruling and whatnot.
Hmm. Hmm.
But in my point is everything in this war moved a lot faster than what it's
Yeah.
represented on the map. I would like to see an attempt in the future editions to make the baseline a little more historical accurate.
Hmm.
Now, that's me. This is my opinion. This is my hot take. I don't. While yes, it is frustrating to take 2.5 years to move a battleship, to
Yeah.
Egypt from London. Um, it's a matter of me being less able to suspend my disbelief than some other people,
Hmm.
and that's okay for them. And I'm not saying that this is a problem with the game. I'm just saying this is something I would like to
Yeah.
see in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
Just like I would. And there's other aspects, like I'd like to see the technology system reworked in a way
Sure.
where it's
Yeah.
not so random. That's on my wish list of things I would like to see fiddled with.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So when it comes to strategic naval movement, yes, I will absolutely use it when I play the game. I will use every
Hmm.
tool at my disposal. But does it feel like it's making the game more historically accurate for what was actually possible during that time frame? Not even a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's me. Rant over. Import. Um, So we discussed import and out of port extensively in a previous video.
Yeah. I feel like
There
we did.
hasn't
Yeah.
been
We
any
we.
kind of major changes to it that I'm aware of,
Okay.
so I don't see any reason to kind of revisit it unless you
Fair
want
enough. Yeah. Yeah. I recall
to.
skipping to this point. Yeah.
If we got to just come back to it for some reason, like later on,
Hmm.
yeah, great. No, it's not that big of a deal.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so that puts us on into chapter 12, the place units phase.
Hmm.
So place units and facilities from the build queue place units box. Place facilities where they were started, i.e. where the under construction marker. If you cannot place a unit or facility for any reason, it remains in the place units box until the next player turn. When placing units, the following applies. Units must be placed at a factory in a supply path with available capacity, 13.2.1, which you have possessed since the beginning of the player turn. That may be interdicted. So simply having a supply path to a factory with an enemy ship in the way, when we get to interdiction, that can be interdicted. I don't think that used to be able to be interdicted.
Hmm. Hmm. Now,
Um,
quick question about this here, but what happens if you're France and you lose your capital and you have stuff in the build queue that didn't show up on the board? Say for whatever reason you're trying to play weirdly or janky and say, I'm gonna save all my money until a turn before the Germans attack. Then I'm gonna build all kinds of infantry and super stack my production queue, let's say, right? And now you can't place all your units, but you still have like 6 units left over. And now you're forced to surrender. I'm assuming they're removed in that case.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
Whether
Okay.
they're going to stay in limbo? No. Okay, let's say that they're halfway to the infantry divisions that you're building are halfway to being formed. France
Hmm.
surrenders. Germany comes in and says, "No, go
Yeah.
home."
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they don't
Oh, that
haul
makes
you
sense
off
to
to
me.
slave labor or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
the case is. So you know what? Either way, yeah, that's a strict. I mean, again, I'm Mister
Mm.
Rules as written, but
Hmm.
even I think that's a bit of a stretch. That just
It
doesn't seem
is.
to make any
I'm just trying to
sense.
think of corner case scenarios. Like, yes, okay, Free France is established. It's a discontinuation for France. But let's say in another example, okay, so you can't place any units because you lost all your factories, but your nation still survives. Bizarre situation, right? You're still surviving. Can you still have it in the production queue even if you don't have factories? I presume so.
I think so long as you haven't surrendered, that
Yeah.
kind of makes a little more sense. France
Hmm.
surrendering, you're right, it's gone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
But if you're, let's say, the that's a bad example. Well,
Let's say Germany is, all their factories are
I think
wiped
it's
out
an
effectively.
unlikely scenario.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think so long as the nation is still fighting,
Mhm.
or let's say Russia, you've taken a bunch of factories from Russia and you've completely demolished the other two,
Mhm.
so that they're going to repair them this turn, but there's nowhere to put units. I think they just sit there waiting.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Makes
Russia's
sense.
still fighting, and then
Yeah.
when they finally get the space, they can,
Yeah.
pump guys out of the queue.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think once they surrender everything, because when you surrender, all your units go off the board.
That's
So
right.
I
Yeah.
don't see anything in the queue being the not being the exception.
Exception. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. All right. Let's move on. I know it's a case that's never going to show up. I was just thinking
Well,
of
don't
it.
say never.
Okay.
People have said, "Oh, that'll never happen," and then you
Yeah.
got a dozen people
Yeah.
suddenly
That's
on
right. Yeah.
Discord saying, "No, that happened last week." Oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
happened 2 weeks
Fair.
ago. Actually, that's about to happen in my game. So
Yeah.
we would like
Okay.
an answer on this one. Does
Sure.
anybody
Sure.
know how to handle this? That absolutely happens. Um, hold on 1 second. There we go. A newly upgraded factory is not able to utilize its increased capacity until the next player turn. Capital ships must be placed at a major shipyard in a supply path with available capacity, uh, which you have possessed since the beginning of the player turn. Non-capital ship naval units must be placed at a shipyard in a supply path with available capacity, which you have possessed since the beginning of the player turn.
Okay, so this one I'd say the capacity of what? The capacity of the factory in the supply. So capsules must be placed in a major shipyard in a supply path available with available capacity, which you have possessed since the beginning of the player turn. Um,
So the default available capacity is 5.
yes, yes.
That's all it's saying.
Yeah, but supply path is defined as what is it defined as a connection to a factory? I can't recall what it
You know
is in
what?
this version.
That's a great point. Let's go look that up. I know we've talked about it, but I am not sure. But it's worth
Hmm.
revisiting.
You might have to control F, find it.
Supply path, a virtual path of land and or sea
Okay,
zones traced
from your
across the
home country.
map from your home country for various purposes.
Okay, so
1.11 can be blockaded, and
yeah,
interdicted. So let's actually go look at 1.11 while we're here.
all right.
Just
So it's not so far. It seems to be not by the factory in your home country, just your home country in general, which makes sense. Why not?
supply paths are virtually traced across the map when required. They are not actually shown on the map. Supply path can be traced any distance as does not require transport nor use up rail capacity. A supply path can be traced as follows. By land, the supply path must travel along undamaged railroads and or rivers. Players may give each other permission to trace supply paths through land zones they possess regardless of alliance. Using their railroads/rivers as needed. If a river travels between two land zones, permission must be granted by a player possessing the land zone on either side. If one or both land zones on each side of the river is neutral, permission is automatically granted by that neutral. One side may not be possessed by an enemy nation. Supply path can travel
Oddly
any.
enough, it doesn't even say. Go on.
Uh, yeah. Supply path can travel any number of sea zones. The path must enter and leave the land zone where there is an undamaged port, dockyard, or shipyard. Players may give each other permission to use naval facilities to trace supplies as needed. Players may also give each other permission to use straits and canals at their possession. Once a supply path has re-entered land zones from sea, it cannot move across more sea zones. Enemy units can prevent the tracing of supply paths by either blockade or interdiction.
So one comment here is you have two pieces of information spread across multiple pages. You have up here what a supply path is under whatever category this thing is up here, right? So if you scroll up, what do they call this? The appendix? Is that what they're calling this? A new
I think
terminology?
this is a glossary.
Glossary, right? So this is actually describing what a supply path is, like where it's originating from. But where it actually refers to supply paths in 1.11, it doesn't actually say where it's coming from
Yeah,
and
no, that's
what
actually
its
a good
utility.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now here it does say from your home country.
It does
It
in the
doesn't say from a
glossary,
home
right?
factory. It says from a home
Yeah,
country.
yeah.
Um,
But this is, I wouldn't necessarily go to the gloss. I mean, would I go to the glossary or
hey,
would I
what was
go
the
to the
search?
path
What was the search function?
Control F? Yeah. So uh, I find it interesting. Like the information is scattered into two spots. So I'd say, add a line there underneath supply path saying a supply path is any territory in your home country is the originating point of a supply path. Any territory. It doesn't have to be a capital, any territory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should say that. You're right. It should
Mhm.
say that.
Okay, so when it's speaking about capacity, with available capacity, so my first inclination is like, okay, so if it's something like version 3, and I might be mistaken version 3, but I thought it was a shipyard connected to a major factory by railway or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, by
Yeah.
supply path. And so when he speaks about capacity, it's like capacity of the major factory or capacity of the shipyard. Now, in this case, it doesn't talk about that, but it's okay, so
It's always going to be
shipyard
shipyard.
is going to be
The
shipyard,
the
yeah.
capacity of the shipyard is separate from the factory that
Right,
that is
yeah, and
there.
it was that way in version 3 as well. It was
But
that
I
way. It's
know
like,
some people have had issues with that where they
yeah.
think that to use this shipyard, you're actually using the factory capacity that it's connected to. That's not
Mm-hmm.
true. Shipyard is a separate entity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that needs to be
Well,
clarified that
I
it's from
agree.
home country. Yeah. I do
Yeah,
like that
yeah,
it's from home country and not a factory. I think that makes more sense. I
yeah.
think that'll be a little bit
Well,
easier to
it
execute.
also makes sense in regards to if you wanted to build a factory, you could just simply say any home country territory. It's like, okay, well, that answers that question. If I have no factories at all,
Hmm.
I just own some home country, I could
All you
still
need is
build
the money.
factories. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So okay, we get that one. Ships built at major shipyards may be placed in port.
Hmm.
Militia are not built via factories. The number of militias you may place in a land zone is equal to the land zone's point value with a minimum of one.
Mm-hmm.
If the land zone has no point value, you may place one maximum of one per player turn in non-originally owned land zones. You must have possessed the land zones since the beginning of the player turn. Note that outside home country, the maximum number of militia a major power can have in a land zone is equal to the IPP value of the zone, minimum of one. In home country, there is no limit. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I both agree that's a huge improvement to militia.
It is. It is. Yeah.
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 Makes them, they still have a use in the game, but you got to use your
Yeah.
actual army to fight, with the
Yeah.
exception of
No,
defending
that's
the home
true.
country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know. I think it still could be improved upon, to be honest, with militia, but
well,
I think it's
I
good.
think it's fine the way it is. I mean,
Yeah, okay. All right.
yeah,
Well, that's just my
I think this is
sure.
perfectly fine the way it is right now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, cool. Okay.
Colonial infantry are not built via factories. They must be placed in land zones with a point value outside of home country. The maximum number in which may be built per player turn in a land zone is equal to the land zone's point value. The land zone must be originally possessed. You must have possessed the land zone since the beginning of the player turn. Note that colonial infantry, like other specialty infantry, is limited to a maximum of 2 purchased per player turn. All good there.
All good there.
I know there's a lot of confusion in the last edition because of the wording
Yeah.
used. Unintentionally, a sentence got cut on the reference sheet
Mm-hmm,
for colonial
mm-hmm.
infantry, and so everybody thought you could build them anywhere. No, it has to be original. Think of them as being, anybody wasn't sure about this, think of them as being, you already control, like Libya. You control and own
Yeah,
Libya. Or
yeah.
is Libya worth a buck? Somaliland.
No. I believe so. Yeah,
Italian
Somaliland.
Somaliland. You've controlled it for how many years? So the locals see you as the authority, so you can
Mm-hmm.
recruit them.
Sure.
The
Yeah, yeah,
British
yeah.
guys you just conquered, you can't recruit
Yeah,
them
yeah.
ever,
Let's say like
with the
Italian
exception of militia.
Somaliland. Yeah, yeah. Like some of these territories have been in colonial hands or in French hands or British hands for X amount of years.
Mhm.
And this war is actually quite recent. Only 2 years. Maybe you've held on to, maybe the British have held on to Italian Somaliland for 2 years. Well, 2 years relative to the Italians holding it on to, but for X amount of years with all the colonial individuals, colonizers that they sent over, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think that's a good way to think about it
Yeah.
if you ever
Yeah.
kind of stumble upon that again.
Okay, well,
Uh,
quick redress of this militia thing. So it's a separate video topic, but my thinking is militia, if you take them as militia in the sense of like local people you've given arms to, just basically threw them to some very basic training and sent them off to fight. I don't like the idea of super stacks of Russian infantry, militia rather. I don't think it works, and especially if you have a discount on the first turn when you're at war with a major power, you can get militia for $1 a piece, and I have super stacks of militia, and that kind of bends the descriptive term of what militia are supposed to represent, right? So that's the issue I have with this unlimited and home country territory.
There could be a different way of describing them as like you could describe them as a garrison unit.
Sure, yeah.
You know, or something along those lines.
But then each of them is problematic. So I'm designing my own
each
game.
one is a little problematic.
Yeah.
But I've never always envisioned them as just being locals.
Yeah.
I've envisioned them as including anything, like even a garrison unit. Or a Polizei unit or something like that, you know, a Gestapo unit. All of that is lumped together to represent the generic militia. And it's because it's before they could stack out of control.
Yeah.
Now there's a cap on them. So it's okay, great. You've invested the time and the money to organize them into a real defense force by paying 2 IPP. Here you go.
Yep.
That makes sense to me.
Yep. Yeah, it's a topic for another video if we wanted to go over it. Anyways, moving on.
And then it just gives a quick example here of a major factory. For each point of damage, it reduces their ability to produce units by 1 per point of damage. It's a discussion for a different video too. Repair. I've got something else to say about that, but that's another video. Repair. Remove damage markers from repaired facilities. Damage.
So it's first the order of play is place units, then repair factories, then upgrade, I guess. Is that something correct? Place units and facilities, then repair.
I don't think it's a set.
No? Okay. All right.
So I don't see anything. And usually they're kind of very, when it does matter, they usually, like the French going Vichy, it's very specific, the order in which you're supposed to do things. And there's a very specific reason for that. Here, I don't see it being a huge deal.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm just wondering if I could, like in this example that they have here, the right at the end. So a major factor has 3 damage. The owner paid for a full repair of the production phase. In the place unit phase, the owner is only able to place 2 units at this factory. So that implies to me, if I'm correct in this, major factory normally produces 5 units. It has 3 damage. So since he could only place 2 units, that implies that the repairs can happen after the place units.
I think the fact that it is repaired is something that you have to take into account for the entire turn.
Yes.
Pulling the damage off, even before you physically place units, pulling the damage off doesn't remove the fact that they were damaged by 3 points, thus you can only place 2 guys.
Yeah. But that's effectively saying that the repair happens after place unit phase.
If you want to be specific, but I don't think these steps are specific. You can do them in order.
No, it's not specific, but it's, I don't know, a way of making it clear to people and answering a question before it's asked, let's say. I don't know, it doesn't matter. All good.
So damaged capital ships that have been at a friendly dockyard or shipyard since the beginning of the player turn are now repaired up to the available repair capacity. Ships that have been in port with a skeleton crew since the beginning of the player turn are now reinforced. Upgrades. You want to take this one?
Oh, sure. Okay, so upgrading requires a supply path to the land zone that the unit or facility receiving the upgrade is in. A unit that has moved attacked can be upgraded in the same player turn. If the upgrade cannot reach a suitable unit due to the casualties or units moving outside a supply path, the upgrade remains on the build queue until a supply path exists to a suitable unit in a future place unit phase. Militia can be upgraded to regular infantry for $2, up to a maximum of 2 units per player turn. Regular infantry can be upgraded to motorized for $1, up to a maximum of 2 units per player turn. So that's interesting. I quite like that. My one comment, I suppose, is that, well, of course, they've upped the amount of upgrading you could do to 2 as opposed to 1, which is quite nice. There's another comment I want to make.
And they've limited motorized down to 2 rather than unlimited.
Yes,
And
yeah.
I think it's
And the
all
fact that you could,
consistent with all. If you just think of those as being just like the
yeah.
specialized infantry, it's all just two. You can only build two of these
Hmm.
specialized.
Hmm.
Upgrading militia, it's like a specialized. Upgrading loader, it's like a specialized. And I think
Yeah.
that is consistent. The number is consistent, and mentally, it's consistent to keep track of it.
Yeah. My only thought here is the fact that you can, I mean, maybe it's somewhat breaking not the spirit, but the previous methodology. Like it's, so the unit that has moved and attacked can be upgraded in the same player turn. Okay, but not the ship that's being repaired. And so in some sense it kind of breaks the pattern that has gone on before where why if you these infantry have been heavily engaged in fighting and now you're upgrading them, that seems to be a difference between that and something else, let's say, right? Now I know of course a battleship is a much different story, repairing
Yeah,
the damage on that one than anything else, but yeah, anyways,
I don't know. I don't
like
really. I don't really. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I don't really see it being an issue.
it really
Um,
depends on how you perceive it too. Like, is a battleship one ship? Is a destroyer model one
no,
ship?
no,
If
it's
a
supposed to be
destroyer
like
model
a
is
flotilla or a small task
right,
force.
if
Yeah.
a destroyer model is like 40 destroyers and a battleship is like 3 battleships, then it's feasible that you can say, okay, they should be able to attack and move and still be repaired on the same turn or not. It doesn't matter which, but here we have the infantry doing one thing and the battleship doing another. I'm just wondering if that will cause some confusion where it's an exception to the regular pattern of things, but maybe
Um,
not.
we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll
I don't
see.
think so. I think it'll be fairly evident, but yeah, anyways.
So, okay, lend-lease delivery. You must start the lend-lease delivery in your home country. FEC does not have a home country. Refer to its national reference sheet on how it can deliver
Mhm.
lend-lease. The lend-lease must then move along a supply path to a land zone in the receiving nation's possessed home country. Lend-lease units have no combat value during delivery. If given permission, you may use other players, regardless of alliance, naval facilities, and railroads to deliver lend-lease. The lend-lease stops in the first land zone in the receiving player's possessed home country. Lend-lease
Mhm.
bases and militia upgrades are moved to the recipient's place units box in the build queue to be placed anywhere in their home country in the next place units phase. Delivering via land. Lend-lease may be moved across any number of land zones. It must travel along an undamaged railroad and or rivers. Naval units cannot be delivered via land. Delivery via sea. Lend-lease may be moved across any number of sea zones. No naval transport is required. Such movement must leave and enter land zones where there is an undamaged naval facility. Select which naval facility in your home country will be used to send the lend-lease. Select which naval facility will be used to receive the lend-lease. Major naval facilities may receive lend-lease deliveries of any value, but minor naval facilities can only receive deliveries with a maximum price for the recipient of 5 IPP. Eligible naval units can be received in port at this facility. Lend-lease must then follow the shortest path route available. Where two routes are equidistant, the player sending may select either. After being received at a naval facility, the lend-lease may continue its delivery via land zones, but it cannot move across more sea zones. Any questions so far?
Um, no, I don't think so.
They did clarify one that I had about being in port. Units can be delivered in port at this facility. So
Hmm.
you don't have to leave it out there in the water to get bushwhacked. It can go in port with anything
Yeah.
else, even though it may not have the opportunity to go into port. It just goes into port upon delivery if you want.
Hmm.
Interdiction.
I'd have to look more deeply into this one and really have another read through, but I'm trying to think of, again, corner cases because, hey, that's kind of what we're here for, is to really look deeply into stuff if at all possible. I'm trying to think of, I know it says that Germany can't lend these naval units over land, right?
Right.
I'm just so that's a difference from version 3 where you could lend these submarines to Italy. So I'm just trying to think of, yeah, anyways, I can't see any issues there. Let's move on.
Actually, that's a good point. And I explicitly remember doing that with Italy and not checking
Hmm.
the supply path
Hmm.
in my last game. And so I'm going to bring that up with the guys. Maybe that's something we need to think about in the future.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. Interdiction. If the route passes through a sea zone with interdicting units, we're coming to that, the lend-lease may possibly be eliminated. Blockade. If the route passes through a sea zone that is blockaded, the Lend-Lease cannot be delivered. A blockaded naval facility cannot send nor receive Lend-Lease.
Mm.
So when it says pass through, it means passing through to the port. It doesn't mean passing through to go to somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Failure to deliver. Lend-Lease that cannot be delivered must wait until the player's next turn. On the next player turn, it can be attempted again or reassigned in the production phase to arrive in the place units phase for the nation that built it. So, yeah, that makes sense too.
Yep.
There's no safe place to land now because of the way the game turned out. You're not getting this, Britain. Sorry, but we're going to use it.
Sure. Yeah.
So interdiction. Supply paths and Lend-Lease delivers can be interdicted if they pass through a sea zone that contains either a non-submerged submarine of a nation at war with the sending nation, an aircraft on map of a nation at war with the sending nation. Mm-hmm. For each zone where the delivery is interdicted, it is subject to an interdiction die roll. The player tracing the supply path rolls 1d12, and the player attempting interdiction rolls another. There are no die modifiers. If the interdicting player rolls higher than the player tracing the supply path, the delivery is eliminated. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's like a resisted roll now. It's not just a 25% chance.
Yeah.
Germany and Great Britain are at war. There is a German non-submerged submarine in the supply path for Great Britain's minor factory in Cape Town. If the British player decides to place a unit in that facility and loses the interdiction die, the unit the British player wanted to place at the minor factory is eliminated. Okay, that lays that out what I was talking about earlier. You can now interdict units going to factories across elsewhere.
Yeah.
I like that. Mm-hmm. It's definitely going to take some time to get used to looking for that when you place units, but it is something to consider.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, that makes submarines much more interesting too.
So only submarines, non-submerged and aircraft on map can interdict. Surface ships cannot interdict. Mm-hmm. 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 Ships captured in port.
Well, you know what? Yep. We how much more do we have for the rest of the chapter? Because we are down to 1 minute.
That much.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, we'll stop. Are we going to start again? Or are we going to call it here?
No, we could start again.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So where were we? Ships captured in port. If conquering a land zone containing a naval facility with ships in port, roll a d12 for each ship. On a 1 through 9, scuttled, removed from the game, and a 10 through 12, captured by the attacking player. I will tell you, ships that are captured in its current stage the ship is captured in its current state regarding damage and or skeleton crew. I got to tell you, the last game I played, or I'm still playing as the Germans, taking the British Midlands with 2 French battleships in port was a lot of fun. And sailing one away back to Germany, that was a lot of fun. I had a good time with that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know, it makes me wonder, though. So I've been reading or listening to a lot of videos about dice mechanics, and there's plenty of interesting things a person can do with dice. One thing I don't find too interesting is the complete randomness of dice sometimes, right? Sometimes it's nice to have a bit more of a bell curve as a predictability of things. Now, of course, you can't do that with everything in these types of games. You can't have 2 dice for every infantry unit because that would take you forever to do battles. But some stuff like this, I wonder if it'd be worthwhile doing 2 dice 6, right? Or maybe for recruitment rolls, which are going to come into 2 dice 6 as well. So you have a nice kind of bell curve average about your predictable kind of results sometimes, right?
There is a huge number of options available for that.
Mm-hmm.
Some that some that wouldn't cross your mind. Sure. Some ways of okay, well, you've gotten a certain number of successes, so now your opponent, it's some games refer to it, newer games, board games refer to it as like a comeback mechanic.
Sure.
If you have your opponent just steamrolling you because they got lucky, there's a way for you to be able to get some sort of resource from his luck that you can use on your turn to kind of push back. And so it's not like a runaway game where he just whoosh and just rolls 12 20s in a row and suddenly you're left in the dust. Now he's rolled 12 20s, but you've collected 10 of these resources now because of his
Sure.
luck.
Yeah.
And so you're still in the game. So
Hmm.
there are
Oh
numerous
yeah.
options for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think it could be interesting with this scuttled and captured. Roll 2 dice 6 since it's only per ship that you're rolling. I don't think that would take too much effort because oftentimes people are rolling for each individual ship 1 dice at a time. Anyways, 2 dice on there and be like, okay, you can scuttle them, but it depends on how many of your units have captured the territory. If only one airborne unit has landed here, maybe you shouldn't have an equal chance of getting 3 battleships or something like that. Perhaps it should be.
I would say that's something for a more advanced rule set.
Perhaps,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not pooping on the idea at all.
yeah,
Not at
yeah,
all. I'm
yeah.
just saying, I think for the ease of play, this works
Hmm.
pretty good right now.
Right, but just as a theory, here's a theory. So 2 dice 6. The average is going to be 7. Now you can scuttle a ship at whatever it is. You could say the enemy retreats at this value and retreats and moves to a different port. You capture them in this one and it's scuttled here. That's the spectrum. And let's say normally to capture it, you need to roll a 12. And to scuttle it, you need 9 through till 10 or 8 through till 10. And that gives you the bulk of it's going to be them retreating. Now, for every unit you have, it's a +1 on your dice, right? Or whatever. For every 2 units you have, it's a plus modifier of 2 dice. For every 2 units you have, it's a +1 on your dice roll as well. So there's an increased chance that it leans things towards capturing things, something like that. Anyways,
Yeah, it's completely possible.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you could. I honestly thought it was a little weird that they didn't have like on a 1 through 2, the ship escapes and
sure,
just leaves port.
yeah. I
You
think
know,
so too, because
though
yeah,
it could be argued that that this is one of the big risks, and
yeah,
it is absolutely one of the big risks of leaving your ships in port casually
mm-hmm,
and not
mm-hmm,
thinking about what could happen. And I really
mm-hmm.
did catch the British player with his pants down, so to speak, in that
Sure, yeah,
game. And I saw an opportunity to capture I would have been happy if they both got scuttled. The fact that I captured one was just
yeah. I was
icing on the cake.
absolutely, yeah, totally, totally, yeah, yeah.
Um, but it just showed how dangerous it is to not be paying attention to,
Mm-hmm,
or taking for granted. Well, my ship. When you look at your ships, you got to look at the land zone they're staying in port in now too,
mm-hmm,
or something like
mm-hmm,
that might happen.
mm-hmm.
So that was a lesson learned for him,
Sure,
and
yeah,
and I was fortunate that I saw it and took advantage of it, and so
yeah.
everybody in the game now knows. Oh, that's a
Something to
thing.
do. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah.
So recruitment roles. So recruitment roles are a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, they do not get IPP income, but make recruitment rolls. A recruitment roll is a D12. On a result that is equal to or less than the number of land zones the controlled nation possesses, you get either 1 infantry or 2 militia in land zones possessed by that controlled nation, or advancement of 1 ship on the controlled nation's build queue. So
Hmm.
Vichy, in theory, could actually complete one of its ships,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
or 1 full facility repair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, obviously
Sure.
there's a
Yeah.
chance because Spanish facilities, do they automatically repair at the end of the Spanish Civil War? I don't think. I would guess they don't anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think
If
so.
this is here, because that makes sense. That would be what this is for, because now they're a controlled miner throughout the game
Mm-hmm.
rather than just sitting there doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Offshore.
I would actually, so again, this is not so much of a critique of how the rules are written, but just this, what should be added to it. In my opinion, I find I'm a person that really likes not neutral nations specifically, but the involvement where it feels like a more global, alive world where you're living in. And I would actually like to see that the neutral nations have a bit more of an impact on the game in some ways. And so I actually wish that the recruitment roles were more impactful, where Finland could almost expect every single turn to have a decent chance, not a complete chance of getting a new unit each and every turn, but an
Mhm.
increased likelihood, let's say, of it.
And one thing I was talking with a buddy of mine just the other day, and he was asking, "Hey, I can't find that chart where all the neutrals get their new units."
Yeah,
I go, "Yeah, it's because it's not in this edition anymore." He
yeah,
goes, "What?" He goes, "Yeah," and I go, "Yeah, they got rid of that for ease of play." He
yeah,
goes,
yeah,
"Ugh, really?" He goes,
yeah.
"That they weren't sitting there doing nothing."
No, that's right.
Now,
Yeah,
maybe it's replaced with something else. Maybe there's another way to handle that. That
yeah,
is a little bit easier, a little more straightforward, and isn't
right.
quite. Now, I personally didn't have a problem with it, but
Yeah.
I'm not put off by complexity as much as some people are. I
Mhm.
also am very meticulous about taking notes on things. And so
Mhm.
for me, it's a lot easier because of that to remember what I want to
Mhm.
do. And,
Mhm.
I just, okay, here's this block that I do at the beginning. Here's the block I do during this phase. Here's a block of things I got to do. Oh, right, roll
Mhm.
for it.
Mhm.
Okay, that guy gets that. That guy
Yeah.
gets that. That guy gets
Yeah.
that. To me, it was no big deal.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But I get why they might have made that decision, though I'm ambivalent towards it, I guess,
Oh
ultimately.
yeah. Yeah. I liked it quite a bit. I think there's something you could do with recruitment rolls here too with two dice six and say, same thing is like you roll two dice six instead of one dice 12. That way you at least have a more predictable average. And I think it'd be interesting too is to say other nations can choose if they want to give them a +1. So Germany, for instance, could be like, yeah, I'm going to give them one IPP, and that will boost their dice roll by one. And maybe the British as well. So the British look at Finland and say, Finland's in an ongoing struggle with the Russians right now. Maybe I don't want Russia to go after Finland. I'm going to send them some arms and such, and so it'll be a +1 to their dice roll, or perhaps a
Well,
reroll of the dice roll, or something like that.
one thing you could do, and this idea just sort of crossed my mind, is the Axis player and the Allied player and possibly the common turn player at the start of each turn can pick one neutral nation that they already don't control, literally
Sure.
just a neutral
Yeah.
nation somewhere on the board, and they
Yeah.
can. I want to make a recruitment roll for that nation.
Yeah.
Got four
Yeah.
zones, roll it, and if they get it, then that player who rolled it gets to do it, showing their influence.
Sure.
However, you can't
Yeah.
double up the same nation in the same turn or two turns in a row.
Right. Right. Right.
Some
Yeah.
variation on that. Obviously, not play tested, but just as a concept, maybe that's a way that it can be, kind of there can be interesting discussions about, hey guys, I think Russia's going to go for Turkey. Let's roll for there. It's like, yeah, I'm more worried about reinforcing Finland. Or well,
Right.
guys, we haven't even thought about Italy coming down to Greece.
Yeah. No, I get what
And
you're
maybe
saying.
you
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
have maybe
Yeah.
each alliance only has one or two tops per turn.
Right. Yeah.
You,
Mm.
you lay it out real quick,
Yeah.
you roll the dice, and nope, didn't get it. Move
Sure.
on. If we did, great.
Yeah.
Put an infantry here, or put a militia here, call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. That's interesting. Yeah. A good concept.
Okay, influence rolls. Those are nation specific, so we won't go into that. Collect income. The last thing a player does before ending their turn, um, start is collect their income.
Hmm.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Pretty
End of round.
straightforward. Yeah.
Once the U.S. player has collected income, is the end of the round. Remove IPP loss trackers on convoy lines. If the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is in effect, German player receives 5 IPP and the USSR receives 3 and 1 technology roll. Simultaneously refer to 6.4.
Mm.
Beginning July 1944, the game end die roll is made, refer to 3.4. If the game
Yeah.
continues, move the calendar marker up and continue the next turn.
Perhaps the only thing I would add here in the collect income stuff for those new players that show up that haven't been evolved from Axis and Allies, perhaps it'd be worthwhile saying, it says it also collects wartime bonus income, refer to 5.3. I know I'm opposed to this idea of skipping back and forth between 5.3 and 12.9 to kind of get all your facts straight. Perhaps I should add a line here saying you collect wartime bonus on the status of what the game board looks like at the end of your turn or end of the nation collecting income turn, as opposed to the start, just for those new players that don't have any Axis and Allies experience, right? So you get what I mean? Where they don't come to the table and be like, I didn't control Sweden at the start of my turn, so I don't collect that bonus income. Is maybe it'd be worthwhile throwing it here too, or not. Minor equivalents, of course, is stuff
Once it
inconsequential.
also begins collecting wartime bonus income. So you're just clarifying that it's based on the game state when you're collecting income.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And
Oh,
I think it should
okay.
be written here. I know it might say that already in 5.3, but it might need to be looked at over here as well too.
That's possible.
Yeah. And that's
So,
it.
okay. Are we going to call this there or
I think this is going to be a
a
fun
good
chapter,
stopping
this
point?
next
Yeah.
one, 13. So let's
There's a
leave
lot
what we
ground to
did so
cover with this
far.
next chapter too.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah.
Could you look up 5.3 for fun
5.3. Yes,
while
I
we're here?
can.
War and Peace.
Wartime bonus income. A nation may be eligible for bonus income based on certain circumstances listed on its national reference sheet. Note, some instances of wartime bonus income are eligible when a nation is at peace, but most instances require a nations to be at war. Can be tracked on the IPP chart. Okay, so it kind of says that. It kind of says
nowhere
that.
here does it say you collect it based on the status of the end of the player turn when you're in the collect income phase. There could be some people saying, no, at the start of my turn, just because, again, minor quibble of no consequence here too, but some people might be like, okay, because factories work where I can't roll for my research until it's repaired because they're bombed at the start of my turn. I can't roll for that research. Then, or you get what I mean, that they might not be able to collect the wartime bonus for it. Anyways, for some people,
it's better to clarify.
It is, and
because you never know what the experience level of somebody is who's reading these.
That's right.
Yeah, and you may get somebody. Yeah, that's
who's never played Axis and Allies or anything like that,
or doesn't even know anything about World War II.
Right.
And so they're like reading some of these rules and go, "Wait, I didn't realize how. Wait, why does that work that way?" Well, that was the technology of the time. You know, I even had a conversation with somebody where I explained. I was talking about strategic rockets to him. He doesn't play board games. I was just sort of making small talk with him, and he stopped me and he goes, "Quick question, yeah, what's a strategic rocket?" I was assuming he knew what a World War II strategic. No, I was using the term V1 and V2.
Right.
What's a V2 rocket? I literally have no idea. I forgot he's a lot younger than me, and he's not a history buff. So I took it for granted that most people know what a V2 rocket was. He had no concept. So the same thing works with rules. Is you got to realize some people just don't know. They just
for sure.
Look, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing what you're saying. I mean, it makes sense what you're saying, but I'm not seeing it here.
Well, and also in this specific case, it could be argued, let's say in the case of Germany collecting that income for Swedish iron ore from Sweden, right? You could say, okay, they did not control it at the start of their turn. So therefore, all the mineral wealth that's been flowing down south to Germany, they shouldn't be able to collect that because you have to recapture that territory, and then all the convoy, the mines, the rail carts, the boats have to start flowing there. So they should not technically be collecting that because they did not own that territory. One could say, right?
You could make that argument that the state or bonus income is checked at the start of the turn, but collected at the end of the turn. Now, is that more work for the players? Yes. Is it worth it? Probably not.
No,
I'll say probably not. You know, and again, honestly, you know me, I like my realism, but you know, and just the other day I was thinking, you know, I like the idea of having to place your units where they're going to be built at the start of the turn as you buy them. And then they come off the production line. However,
that's what Larry Harris's War Room does too, in some ways.
However, the reality is it sucks to play that way.
Sure.
It's not fun. Even though it's far more realistic to do it, you know, to kind of have to be locked in like that, it also creates a very things become a lot more clunky. Strategic planning becomes long-term planning becomes a lot harder.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I agree with you because
now I think that if this game was designed from the ground up, taking that into account, it would be different. It could be different. However, I would not want to play that way with the game in its current state.
Sure. Well, okay, I could agree with that. Yeah.
You know,
but there's also I don't know if I'd agree with the idea that it's clunky because you could say there's plenty of flaws with it. The way it is like, okay, now you could suddenly react to something that your opponent does and immediately react the same turn as opposed to like 6 months beforehand.
And that's you're exactly right. That is and so there is some suspension of disbelief there. And so, you know, I mean, earlier my discussion about the naval aspect of it suspends my disbelief to the point where it's almost breaking. This does not. This doesn't. Yes, this is a suspension of disbelief, but it doesn't cause me to kind of go, "Oh, this is stupid." And having practically looked at a game as I played it, and said, "Okay, what if I had to play this turn like that?" And ultimately, I kept coming back to it's just not that fun.
Nah, fair enough. Yeah.
You know, you'd have to go back to you. And again, if you walked back the rules and stripped them bare and started from a brand new spot and kind of built that up, taking that into account that's how you were going to play this game and design it, it would probably fit a lot better.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. Right on, dude. So I think that's good. I think we're at a good stopping point. Let's next time tackle the whole unit thing. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yep. Cool. All right. So this is Wintermute out from the think tank.
Cheers from Jinx.